Well, Summer, I actually do have some worse webinar stories than that, but it looks like everyone can see and hear us now. Some folks are like saying in the chat where in the world you're joining us from. Keep on
Yeah,
doing that. Uh,
yeah,
I love seeing the geographic diversity. That's always one of the cool things for me about teaching people online and helping online is seeing where in the world people are coming from. And Summer, I have to say, your audience is coming from all over. Just already we have people from Uruguay, UK, Belgium, California, Hawaii, Los Angeles, Munich, Tulsa, South Africa, Mexico City, Scotland, California, Cabo, Missouri, New York City, just like
that's
me.
great. Hey guys, I think some of the folks from India and Philippines, they're trying to stay up really late for this because it didn't really work for their time frame. But if you see anybody from there, that's great too if they stayed up late for this.
Well, we definitely have quite a few time zones here, and some folks maybe in a Mary from Cape Cod probably has a little bit more enjoyable view than me in my kind of small apartment here in New York. But in any case, it's 3:02 p.m. So we do have someone tuning in from the Philippines here, so lots
Oh,
of
there you
folks.
go. Hey guys.
Yeah. So it's 3:02 p.m. for me. So I think it's probably about time for us to get started. So Summer, I'll let you go ahead and take over. You want to share your screen or,
Sure.
just take it away.
Sure, that's great. Hey guys, so I'm so glad you guys are joining from all over the world. It's very wonderful. Today we're going to be doing a presentation, and I really set it up for beginners. And also I'll be asking you guys I'll pause along the way so that if you have specific questions as it relates to some of the items that I'm talking about, so you don't have to wait to the end because maybe some of you have to bounce, before this ends. You have me and I have you for about an hour. So after that, so during that time, I'll ask for questions periodically. And like I said, I have this mainly for beginners because I'm not quite sure, you guys are coming from all over the world. You probably are all in different places of your plant journey, but I'm sure there's things that we could go a little bit deeper on if you have specific questions as it relates to it, but I don't want to leave anybody behind on that. So I'm just going to share my screen now.
Summer, before you
Yep.
do, actually just have just a few quick logistical notes that I
Sure.
should tell everyone about. The
Sure.
first thing is that there's no such thing as a bad question here, but one thing I will tell you right now, there will be a replay. You will get a replay. You will get one automatically. You will get a replay. So I just need a favor from everyone in the chat. If you see someone in the chat ask, will there be a replay or will I get sent a replay? Can you give us a hand and just type yes? That's the most common question, and it really helps if you give me a hand there. And the other thing is, I just want to make sure that you're watching this with good quality. And sometimes people ask, oh, this is kind of blurry. I can't see it, or it's kind of small. So when you're watching the webinar, you're watching on a screen that looks a little bit like this. If it looks a little bit blurry, make sure to click the gear icon here and change the quality to the highest quality, 720. And finally, if it looks a little bit small, you can always make it full screen. Just hit the full screen button right here and it'll go full screen. So I think those are the quick and logistical things, but Summer, go right ahead, back to you.
Oh, great. Okay, well, thank you for that because that's really helpful. I wouldn't have been able to tell people all of that. So you are well versed in this. All right, so can everybody see my screen? Can I have Cameron?
Yeah,
right
screen
up here
screen looks good. Screen
okay,
looks good.
perfect. So this is the right plant. Choose the best house plant for you and your home. So if this is not the presentation that you meant to sign up for, then you could deboard the plane right now. But that is what we're going to be discussing today. And I just wanted to go a little bit over about like my mission in life and a little bit more of my reason for being and maybe a little bit more of my background for those of you who don't know me. But really my whole North Star is to really reconnect people back to nature. And I really think that if we do that, we could become more empowered, more in tune to our communities, more in tune to the creatures that are around us. And I think what's, wonderful about, doing all this work that I've been doing with houseplants, you might know me from my YouTube channel, Plant One On Me, is that, I'm often viewed as like a quote unquote expert in this field, but as you get to know a subject or any subject in any kind of field, you begin to realize that you don't have all the answers. And I think what really drives me in all the work that I do is not necessarily what I do know, but what I don't know. And there's always so much more that you don't know and that you're constantly surprised with. And I think that if you have a curious nature and if you're more observant, which is something that I think is a really valuable soft skill when it comes to your plants, well, then you're probably going to have a really enjoyable life, and one that is never boring. So that's that. And then just to give you a little bit of background on myself, I grew up in northeastern Pennsylvania, and I pretty much was in gardening and nature my entire life. I grew up in a really beautiful area that was surrounded by farm, field, and forest. I grew up consuming my mother's National Geographic magazine, so that really gave me an opportunity to dream kind of bigger than my backyard. And I went to school for environmental sciences and entomology. And I actually threw in here that I am a certified holistic nutritionist. And I think the interesting aspect about that is, you know, obviously how much plants play a role in our diet, and also the nutrients, the micronutrients, the macronutrients that we need in order to be able to run properly. And the same thing with plants, and also our connection to things like the health of soils and the health of our own the microbiota and soils, the microbiome in soils, as well as our own microbiome in our bodies. So that really interested me about how we are just so connected on that level. And more practical stuff, I grow a little over 500 species of plants indoors in my Brooklyn apartment. And it's probably around a little over 1,100 plants right now. And I am currently living with a chicken. So if you see me looking down at my feet, I have another chicken. Some of you may know that I had a chicken named Kippy, but I have a different one, Vita, right now, who I'm watching. And yes, and I run a YouTube channel. We have probably over 500 videos up there called Plant Went On Me. So I tried to answer people's questions to a certain extent on that channel. So, and use that as a log. So if somebody has like, hey, I have a question on what grow lights you use, then I could always refer them to like episode 52 to 54. Or, you know, if somebody has a question about my green wall, I could refer them to a different episode. And I wrote a book recently called How to Make a Plant Love You. And I created the Houseplant Masterclass, which I've actually done with Teachable. And that is a 26-day course that you do. It's audio visual, and you can find me on Instagram at Homestead Brooklyn. So that's a little bit about me if you are curious. So we're going to be going over 4 sections, and I left these pretty broad, and I will pause after some of the sections in case anybody has any questions whatsoever. And the first section is going to be really what is a plant? What's the definition? What are the vegetative structures? What is it all about? And I know this might seem a little bit maybe elementary for some of you, but what's really exciting is that plants are surprising organisms, and maybe I'll share some stories that will kind of keep you engaged on that level, because it's not just about all the plants that we have indoors, which are similar to one another, as opposed to like more different from one another, because there's certain plants that work well indoors, while there's other plants that may not work well indoors. And then we'll go over light. Light is so important to plants, so that will be the second section. And then we'll go over some of your sensibilities, and then we'll talk about placement of plants in your home. So any questions so far? I don't think I covered too much. So
it doesn't look like any questions so far, but I do see a lot of excitement and folks saying like, "Oh, I'm a first timer on my plant journey," and other people being
great.
like, "I love the channel," and all that sort of thing.
Perfect. Well, thank you guys. I really appreciate it, and welcome to everybody who's beginning on your plant journey. It's a really exciting journey, and it's a wonderful community as well. So let's talk about what a plant is, because it may not be exactly how you remember it from your Bio 101 days or your biology classes in high school, because plants are actually surprisingly really hard to define. So you'll see in my second section here, I have photosynthesis with a big question mark. And the reason for that is because when I was in my biology days in high school, You know, I was told that plants photosynthesize, that they're autotrophic, and autotroph essentially means able to produce one's own food, so feed yourself or feeds itself. And that's true for most plants, and it's true for pretty much probably all of the plants that we have indoors. But there's some plants that actually don't photosynthesize, and they actually have to rely on other creatures in order to be able to get the nutrients that they would get from the sun. So, you know, you can't really define a plant by its ability to be able to photosynthesize, but essentially plants are multicellular, so they're not unicellular, they have many cells, and they all produce by spores. Some of them also have a reproductive part of seeds. Some of them don't actually have seeds. And their plant embryo is actually on the plant body, and it's fed on the plant body. So those are some of the things that, and most actually do photosynthesize, but there are a subset of them that actually don't produce their own food through photosynthesis. And they usually then are hemiparasites or parasitic on other things, maybe on other plants or on fungus or something along those lines. But they're basically relying on some other organism to be able to supply their food, which actually then brings in a whole other subject that's quite interesting. However, it would be very, very hard to actually grow those plants indoors because you would need to create those interactions among organisms. And for the most part, our plants are in, you know, pots and containers, so they're segregated from other organisms or the greater environment. Now, as far as reproduction goes, it goes back to plants all have spores. Some of them actually have seeds. And so there's the sexual reproduction, which, you know, plants could pollinate one another in the same species, and they could produce their own plants, and then it's a new genetic offspring. Or many of them can actually reproduce by these vegetative structures. And this is something that also is indicative to a plant. So plants have certain vegetative structures like leaves or leaf-like structures, stems or stem-like structures, and roots or root-like structures. And those vegetative structures oftentimes could be cut or clipped or left behind, and they will then actually produce a new plant, but it would be genetically similar to the quote-unquote mother plant. So it won't be different. It's like kind of taking, many of you will know apples, like say you have a Fuji apple and you have a Macintosh apple. Well, in order for you to get a replica of that Fuji apple tree, you will need to take a graft or a cutting of a branch of that tree to get the identical apple. Because if you actually took a seed out from the apple, threw it in the ground, then you would be getting something that's genetically different. All right, so let's talk about these vegetative structures like a leaf. When we think of a leaf, I find like this is the reason why we buy plants, because the leaf is really attractive to us for the most part. You know, this is an alocasia right here that you see, and it has these really stark contrasting white midveins and this really dark velvety green leaf. It's in the aroids. You'll hear a lot of people talking about philodendrons and monsteras and Raphidophoras. That is in the Araceae family, and people are really hot for these plants right now because they have the big, bold leaves, and there's so many different varieties, and actually many of them are very amenable to growing indoors. A lot of them are vining plants. They may not look like viners initially, but many of them actually do vine, especially with the philodendrons or the Raphidophoras, or even in some cases the monsteras as well. But the leaf is also a really good way to kind of tell what is happening with your plant. And I encourage people to really develop some observational skills, because you will see some signs that your plant might actually be struggling. And oftentimes, like, you know, folks will say, oh, what happens if I have a yellow leaf or a brown leaf, or I get these little spots on the leaf? Well, in many ways, the stress or the signs that your leaf might be exhibiting is very much like if you have a sniffly nose. You having a sniffly nose can mean so many different things. It can mean that you have seasonal allergies. It could mean that you have a little bit of flu. It could be too soon to maybe say coronavirus, but like you know what I mean? You could have like a little common cold. There's so many different things that can cause a sniffly nose. And that is something that you need to pay attention to, because as you observe how you're taking care of the plant, if your leaf is yellow, you might say, oh, well, I'm going to eliminate the things that I know I'm doing right. And I'll figure out if there's something that is a little off so I could better, take care of my plant. That's a little bit outside of, what we're going to be focusing on today, but I just wanted to kind of throw that out there. So the leaf is the primary photosynthetic surface, because you see that green kind of solar panel right there. And one of the other important things is that it does gas exchange. And gas exchange means that it has like the carbon dioxide coming in, the oxygen going out. It'll have water, it'll kind of push out salts through the leaves. That could actually also damage some of the leaves. So if you see if it has a buildup of too much salt, it could actually burn the leaves. And sometimes if you start to see little brown necrotic or brown spots on the leaves that are sometimes on the undersurface, because that's where some of the pores open up, is usually on the undersurface of the leaves, then it might be that it has too much salt buildup. So these are things that you start to, again, recognize as you're growing your plants. The stem, really the stem developed, and I'm talking about like hundreds of millions of years ago, and I have this as like the alley-oop in photosynthesis. But basically, as plants started to wash up on shore, and they had all these like leaves or leaf-like structures on the shore, it started to get really filled up. So the one that was able to develop a stem to go up towards the sun was the one that is going to win out and then start to shade out the others. And the ones that are maybe not developing a stem will have to figure out how to deal with shade. So if we go back in evolutionary time, that's part of the reason why the stem is really important. You'll notice the stem that I have here, which I believe this is from a Chlorophytum comosum. That's what it looks like. The flower is right there. And Chlorophytum is otherwise commonly known as a spider plant, so you might know it as that. And you can see that the stem here is actually green. So I would guess that this has the ability to also photosynthesize. I find that stems that have that are green, they're a little bit easier to root, especially if you're just kind of rooting in water or you're rooting in some kind of medium indoors. And so they have the ability to be able to photosynthesize. And I actually, not too long ago, I was rooting up a Hoya that had a green stem, and I knocked off the leaf of the Hoya plant, which is commonly known as a wax plant. And it had a green stem, and the leaf actually came back. So I was like a little bit worried, but if it had a woody stem, it would have probably been a little bit more challenging. But I think that green stem had enough ability to be able to pop out another leaf. So I think that's really cool. Stems could act like roots as well. And they could also be storage organs. So sometimes if you see tubers or bulbs, that we kind of consider that a little bit more of a root, but it's really part of the stem. And of course, it acts as transportation to get from the root to the leaf. Then we have the root, and the root is really important because as I was sharing with the plants moving to shore, they had to figure out, well, we used to have water in this ocean, and now we don't have the ability to get water all the time because we're washed up on shore. So what do we need to do? And maybe some of those stems started to act a little bit more like roots, and they started to anchor into the land. The nutrients in the water and were starting to come up through the roots and through the stems and up to the leaves. And then of course, roots actually still need air. So we don't really think about that. We think about, okay, well, the plant needs air and sun and all that other kind of stuff. Well, the root doesn't need sun, hence why it's probably white, but it does need air and oxygen. So oftentimes when you water a plant, that water goes down into the soil and allows for new oxygen down to get to the roots. one of the things that we don't often think about when we water our plants indoors is that we want to water them thoroughly. And part of the reason for that is the plant drinks water from like the growing tips and the little rootlets and the root hairs down below. So it would be kind of like watering your head and trying to drink water when you're pouring water on your head. You might get a little bit, but you're not going to get it all. You'd want to aim for your mouth in order to be able to drink for yourself. So for the plants, it's important to water thoroughly so that that water could reach the part where the roots actually start to drink up. Then, of course, they also serve as protection. I think I might have missed this in the leaves, but the leaves also can serve as protection. And the roots, particularly the roots outdoors, I haven't seen a lot of research on studying how roots protect plants indoors, because indoors they don't probably have the same microbiota and bacteria and fungus like as we do outdoors, but they do serve as protection and to a certain extent from diseases and fungal pathogens. And roots have sometimes a very short lifespan. They could die back during the dry seasons and then start to grow again. So it's a very interesting, I think roots are sometimes the most interesting, but they're the ones that we actually don't see the most. And sometimes if we see something wrong with the leaf or the stems above, it may actually be a problem with the roots. So that's something that I always encourage people to think about. So that's a little bit more about the vegetative structures of your plants. So I'll pause here if there's any specific questions on anything before we proceed forward.
Yeah, so we had a few questions in here. So the first question here was from Pollyanna. So Pollyanna says, I have a southwest window and the sun is really intense from 3 to 7 p.m. And she says that she has a lipstick plant and it seems like some of the leaves are kind of burned, and asks if it's enough to cover the window with a curtain during the times of like really intense sun, if you're seeing something like that.
Yeah, that's a great question, and we'll cover a little bit more about that in one of the next sections. But yes, if you notice your leaf is getting burned, so how do you know your leaf is getting burned? Well, first,
oh, and Summer, I would stop the sharing briefly when you're answering it, just they could right now they're just seeing the screen. So
okay.
while you're
So
answering the question,
let me hold on. Where's my I'm trying to find my my cursor is like not around. Hold on a second. Is this working? Hold on. Let me
yeah, it's working. There you go.
Okay, good. Okay, perfect. So you could see me. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Hi, guys. So Pollyanna, that's a great question. And I'll touch upon light a little bit more in the next section, but I might as well answer your question. Yes, so how do you know that your leaf is actually burning? Because the southwest facing window, particularly if you're in the northern hemisphere, can be really intense. I have one in the back there. And my fig tree will actually start to burn. And so what happens is not you, but like the sun, the intensity of the sun can actually destroy some of the chlorophyll molecules in the leaf. So it'll start to get yellow because the chlorophyll will start to degrade. And when the chlorophyll starts to degrade, it starts to turn kind of a yellow color. And then it eventually will go necrotic or brown. So that's actually what's happening. And again, this goes back to the observational side. If you see your plant turning yellow and you're like, that's interesting, I don't have any pests on it, I've been watering it appropriately, and but what I've noticed is that from 3 to 7, I have really intense sun, then yes, even having a diaphanous curtain, so like a semi-transparent curtain, or even if you have to roll down the shades or anything from 3 to 7 p.m., a plant could get a very bad burn, and it might only take like 15 minutes for that plant to get burned. And I often equate it to people with fair skin. If you have fair skin and you're going outside and you're on the equator and you get hit with a bunch of sun, it doesn't take very long for you to either get a tan or get burned. So that's just the power of the sun. So with the lipstick plant, which is also known as Aeschycanthus, that is a plant that has a semi-succulent leaf, and it has a little bit of this waxy layer to it. So that will provide some protection. And if you look for Aeschycanthuses or lipstick plants out in the wild, they're hemiepiphytic, which means that they're usually growing on a tree, and they could be growing in the ground. But most of the time they're growing in a tree or a tree top, and they will get some bright elements of sun, but not all the time because they're usually underneath the tree canopy. So pulling that plant back a little bit or protecting it with a curtain, I think will be a good thing to do. I do have one of my Aschenanthuses in my southwest facing window, and I put it a little bit into the interior. So I have 2 windows, and it's like kind of in this section with only a little bit actually angled into the sunlight. And that seems to actually work really well. So hopefully that answers your questions. But yeah, 15 minutes and it could be a pretty bad burn. So let me go back to this and share my screen. See if I can get back my, can you see my presentation now?
Back to right where we were.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that question. All right, so this goes back into Pollyanna's question of light. And 3 of the features that we could talk about right now are the quality, is like how good is that light, the quantity, how long are you getting that light, and the intensity, and that's like the how much light. And just using that example that we just had, you know, you have a southwest window, and again, you're in the northern hemisphere, you're in the south, you'll have the opposite, but you have a southwest window and you're in the northern hemisphere, gotta figure out like what that quality of light is. And I'm talking about, as a beginner, no light meters whatsoever. It's just about really assessing kind of your space and, you know, knowing where the sun rises and the sun sets. I have a compass there on the right-hand side because if you have a smartphone, you usually have a compass app, and you could get a sense as to what position your directions face, your windows face. So if you're maybe not as observant and you don't know where the windows come in, then, you know, that if you don't notice like the sun rising or setting, then that's something that you could use as a helpful tip, is just having a compass just to kind of know that direction. The quantity, how long are you getting light? Like, are you getting light from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m.? Are you only getting like direct light during a couple hours of the day? And of course that intensity. So as you know, as our questioner had asked or stated, that 3 to 7 hour is really hot, intense light. And especially in the summer months, at least here in the Northern Hemisphere, that could be really brutal for a lot of plants that are not accustomed to having that amount of intensity of light. So you want to position the best plants that can actually handle that amount of light, which we'll, you know, cover a little bit later on. And I love this quote because I was in a conference, and it was like a, you know, a sustainability conference with people talking about efficiencies in the home. And the guy said, I didn't pay attention to the sun until I installed solar panels on my home. And then, you know, he would know when the clouds would come in, and you become very sensitive and very observant to that. And so I kind of modified this as I didn't pay attention to the sun until I actually got plants in my home. And I think that once you have plants, you notice if they start to like look a little lackluster or if they're starting to burn. And again, you know, there's those of us, especially in the beginning of our plant journey, we might say, oh, I saw these like beautiful plant photos from Pinterest or Instagram or wherever you are, and I want something just like that. And so you kind of like look at plants maybe just as decor, and maybe don't necessarily consider exactly where that plant, you know, could be or should be in your home. And I think some of us are still stubborn. We try different things in our home. I could totally attest to that. I'll, you know, kind of put a plant in a situation where I'm like, can I actually make this work? And will this grow light actually be good for it? And sometimes you are surprised with the results, and sometimes you're like, oh, damn. So paying attention to the light is the most important thing, especially because, like I said, most of our plants photosynthesize, and if you don't have light, then you have no food for your plants. One of the ways that you could actually understand kind of this quality or the intensity of light is really being able to read the shadows. So I'll give you an example. Like in my northeast windows in the morning, I get a little bit of the sunrise, and it's just like such a beautiful, cool, orangey glow of a light. The shadows are really muffled around the edges. And I love sitting in my chair, drinking tea, watching the light come in during that time. It's a very gentle light. And if I go and sit in my southwest window, like next to the Aschenanthus, the lipstick plant, during that 3 o'clock hour, it could get really intense and very uncomfortable. And sometimes you'll see the shadows have a very hard line, like this one with the snake plants. And you could get a sense like, oh, okay, this might actually be some intense light. And so even if you don't have your compass app, there's different ways that you could actually observe the light in your home and just get that sense of what type of light you have. I didn't mention just northern windows. If you're in the northern hemisphere, you'll get this kind of indirect light. So you won't get any rays coming in, but it might just actually be bright or not bright at all. And oftentimes those are going to be hard places to grow plants unless like those plants are typically like in the understories. So trying to grow a plant like, here, let me see if I can stop sharing here. It's weird because when I'm in this scene, I don't have my cursor. Okay, so can you see me, guys?
Yeah.
Okay.
You might have to double click to make your cursor show up.
Okay, I will do that. So if I have a plant like this, which you could see it's like kind of fuzzy and a little whitish, kind of bluish color. Something like this probably wouldn't do well in the northern hemisphere in a northern window. And I say that because, you know, something that has a little bit of white fuzzy texture and a lighter hue usually means that it's equipped to handle more light. So this plant could get really stringy and leggy, or may not grow as quickly if you have this kind of in a really, really low light condition. So those are things to kind of pay attention to with your plants on that kind of level. You know, so if I you know gave you this as a quiz and I say, quick, you know, I have a northern window or a southern window, which window would this grow best in? Then for those of you who say southern window, then that would probably be the correct answer. Although you could be stubborn and you could try things, and I you know have to admit I've been surprised in some of my findings with plants. So the best thing to do is try. And one of the things I really love to do with my YouTube channel is like, hey, this is how I'm growing the plant. This is my experience with it. You know, share yours, because for those of you who are growing plants as well, you might have a different experience with it, or you might be from a drier climate or a more humid environment, and you might have a different relationship with that plant. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. Okay, share. Okay, here we are with the light. This is something also to think about, like when we think about light, a plant cell is like a lens. So it's just like we have the lens of this eye up here, you know, and you look down at these little cellular structures here of the epidermis of the plant. Those are really acting a little bit more like an eye. And depending on the way those are shaped, it will even give a different kind of look to the leaf. So those things are kind of important. You know, it's not something that we could see, you know, without a scanning electron micrograph. But I think the point is like some of the cells of a plant leaf are like our eye cells, and that those leaves are basically designed in order to be able to see and manage and regulate light. And that is what plants are always doing. They're constantly trying to regulate the light they receive. And that can be sometimes hard if we're constantly putting them in a light that is not amenable to them or agreeable to them. So just a question is like, how do we actually protect ourselves from too much light? Shout it out. Cameron will be my eyes. What are some ways that we protect ourselves from too much light?
I'm waiting in the chat, just because I know there's like a little bit of delay in between the chat and the video. And the first one in the chat is "We close our eyes." And then Hayden says sunglasses. Sarah says move into the shade. Sunscreen, says Marie.
Yep.
Anna chimes in as well with sunscreen.
Yep.
Sun hats.
Yep. Great.
Yep. Everyone's on the same page here.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, sunblock, sunscreen, hats, you know, sunglasses. We close our eyes, we move into the shade. Yeah, and you know, plants obviously don't always have those same options. They can't put a clothes on, you know, they can't put sunblock on, but they have different structures within their leaves in order to be able to protect themselves. That lipstick plant that was mentioned earlier, you know, it has a little thin cuticle on the top, which is that waxy substance to really help protect it. The plant I showed you earlier had a little fuzzy jacket that, that was on it, or it might have a little bit of a lighter colored leaf. There's ways that plants will actually start to close their pores off so they don't lose water. So when a plant closes its pore, for anybody who has a spathiphyllum, I don't know if you can see my screen as well, but like if you have a spathiphyllum or peace lily, then when they close their pores, they actually start to flag. The leaves will start to get droopy. So, you know, these are things that the plants will do to protect themselves from too much light. So light is good for your plants, but too much light, depending on the plant, could actually cause severe damage. So that ability to be able to manage that light is often happening at a cellular level, which could actually be very interesting. And of course, when we think about light in the home, do some of us live in a cave? The answer is yes. And you don't have to fret about that because humans invented grow lights, and we have lots of different options on the market. We have pendant lights, we have bulbs, we have under the shelf lights, we have strip lights that could go also under the shelf. We have so many great options with LEDs. I almost exclusively have LEDs now. I have also one remaining fluorescent light. But these are great, you know, they're like, gone are the days of like this kind of purple, blue, reddish light when people just thought you were growing weed in your house. You can still get those, but there's also lights that are broad spectrum and really balanced broad spectrum, and they actually look decent in the house. And because you're always trying to, you know, kind of manage between what looks comfortable in your home, what you're comfortable with, and what your plants need. What I like about grow lights is that you could program them. So you could program them, you know, on the hour for 10, 12, 14, 16 hours a day. You can't manage the sun like that. So I think that, you know, there's a lot of benefits with grow lights. So I think, yeah, so I think we'll stop there. And if we have any specific questions before we proceed.
Some really interesting questions in the chat. So we have quite a few actually.
Okay.
So sorry, coming in here. Okay. So the first one we had, this is actually pretty early on. Sarah Louisa asked a question about your background. So she said, can you tell me a little bit about your certification? I think it was like a holistic wellness certification. She said that she's really interested since this adds a lens and added perspective on what you mean by, you know, choosing the best plant for you.
Yeah, so so basically my background is in environmental science and entomology, which is the study of bugs, and ecology, which is the interaction of organisms out there. And I ended up getting my holistic nutrition certificate because I wanted to know how the food that we eat actually affects our body. And one of the other things that I thought was really interesting was to see the micro and macronutrients and the importance of kind of the ecosystem that plants need in order to be able to do well for themselves, and the connection that it has for our wellness as well. I think I gave an example in the beginning of that, like if we were growing a plant outdoors, it's really important in order to be able to, like when I think about fertilizing a plant outdoors, I really think about feeding the soil. And when I think about like feeding myself, sometimes it's not just about like feeling full, but it's about actually feeding your microorganisms in your belly, because half of our cells are actually not our own personal cells. They are cells of the bacteria, the commensal bacteria in our bodies, for instance. So we're actually feeding some of our microbiome and not just feeling full. So plants, you know, are no different. They broker relationships underground with different organisms, with the same species. And so we don't always get those benefits indoors, but it's something that I am constantly kind of reminded of when it comes to plants. And I think that's why it's an important thing of, yes, we could really get drawn into the life of a plant, but it's always a good reminder in order to be able to get outside and start to observe how plants interact in their native environments. And so, yeah, so when I think about like, kind of like the plants that are right for you, I often think about like, how is this plant growing? How is this plant growing in, you know, its native habitat? What's its natural history like? If anybody of you, have you seen the 365 Days of Plants project that I did on YouTube, you'll have noticed that I share a little bit more about the plant's natural history and typically where it grows and where it's found. And I think that is very revealing because it gives us an opportunity, like in our own homes, in order to be able to figure out where they grow. Any other questions?
Yeah, so there are a bunch, so I'm trying to pick some
Okay.
here, and I'm going to pick one that goes off of what you just said, which is,
Yeah.
you know, how you were you know, really involved in the study of how organisms interact with each other. And so Miguel in the chat, Miguel Angel says, is there any evidence of that having plants, you know, different types of plants in the same pot is beneficial for them? You know, like having them combine root systems, sharing the same soil. Maybe does it depend on like the species? Can you talk more about that?
Sure. So, you know, I just want to share that, you know, there isn't much research as far as growing plants indoors, unfortunately, because as I always share, who's going to fund that research? I would love to see more funding of that research indoors. So I think that we have to like look at some of the research reports that have been done outdoors and start making some, you know, conclusions of our own, or at least best guesses. So of course, when we think about plants that are growing in unison with one another or together, we often think of the corn, the three sisters, the corn, bean, and squash, and growing the corn, bean, and squash together. And why do we grow the corn, bean, and squash together? Well, the corn grows really upright. It really takes a lot of the nutrients for that plant to grow really big and, you know, really juicy. And then we plant the squash, and the squash kind of grows underneath, and we plant the beans, which the beans tend to then vine up on and use the corn to vine up on, because it usually would need to trellis it. And the beans are also nitrogen fixers. So they fix nitrogen, which is the #1 macronutrient that is in usually high demand by plants. And it's very difficult in order to be able to get nitrogen to plants if you're not like fertilizing them with your liquid fertilizer or however you fertilize them. But beans naturally have that ability to be able to fix nitrogen because they have a relationship with bacteria, rhizobium, it's called rhizobium, that have these, and they have these nodules where the bacteria is, and when the beans die back, then that nitrogen becomes available for other plants. So you have this like unique unity of plants. And sure, you know, I would imagine that you could start to experiment with container planting. So for instance, right now in my ficus lyrata, which is a really big tree indoors, I am growing some ginger underneath. And it's a type of ginger that is usually growing in the understory of forests. So I have that below in my container planting, and it's worked really well. I have aglaonema in there as well. And I also planted a little philodendron that I'm hoping will actually climb up and use my ficus as you know, a place to climb up on. It hasn't done it yet, but you know, these are the things that we could absolutely try. I think the challenge comes if in watering the plants. So if you're planting in a large container and you have one plant that has a very shallow root system, and you have a plant that has a deep root system, you know, watering that plant and making sure that that one with the shallow root system is not getting overwatered because you have like a really big container. And oftentimes when you have a big container, the soil stays wetter longer. So you don't want to invite any kind of root rot with that plant. And the environment is enclosed. So that does provide a little bit of a challenge, I think, indoors, is because we're working in this enclosed system, whereas in the outside area, we're technically not working in an enclosed system. But I have done a lot of container plantings. I actually have another one back there where I have multiple plants planted up, and they're all pretty much in the same family too. And that seems to has actually worked pretty well for me as well. So it's worth a shot. All right, let's continue on because I want to make sure I finish this, and we'll have a big question and answer afterwards. So let me see. Share. Okay, so we're moving on to your sensibilities. And once you kind of know the light in your home and you're able to describe that light, you know, say, oh, I get intense light, or I have a northern window so I don't get much light. Then you go to your sensibilities, like really what kind of plant caretaker are you? And I love this little little drawing, you know, if one houseplant makes me happy, then look at what makes me really happy. So, you know, this person is probably somebody who likes to take care of plants. But if you're somebody who like travels, or, you know, you have, you rely totally on your non-green thumbed roommate in order to be able to take care of your plants because you're staying over your boo's house, then you know what, you might need to have plants that are a little bit more better with benign neglect. So understanding your sensibilities, understanding your light, these are things that are going to be really helpful if you're a beginner especially, but even if you're not a beginner, but if you walk into a plant store and you say, here are the things that I'm up against, can you help me? And then next is also placement. So really start to consider the form of a plant. And what I mean by the form is like really the architecture. So look at the structure of the plant. You know, how does the plant grow over time? So with that lipstick plant, which I'll actually have a photo of so people could see what I'm talking about later, you know, lipstick plant actually hangs down. It's like a little bit more of a pendant shape. So, you know, that's something that would start to drape. You know, that might not make any sense if you are trying to get a little desk plant, for instance. Size, that size consideration. If you go into a plant shop, ask somebody like, how big can this plant actually get? Because I'll use the desk as an example. If you're using the plant on a desk, you don't want something that will like completely overtake your desk. So, because you might get something that looks really cute and little, but then you find out that it actually grows like a behemoth. And you're like, oh my gosh, how am I going to fit this in? Many times that's why we buy plants, because we're like, we want something that really will grow and become a behemoth. I mean, that's the reason why I got my fig tree, because I knew that would actually start to take up space over time. And then also the look of the plant. So how does it look when it starts to mature? Because I have to say, not all of our plants look good as they start to mature. And if we're not giving them the optimum kind of light, then they might get a little character to them. They might get a little leggy, which is a meaning where they're starting to actually, you know, increase their stems and not look as like lush as we had wanted them to when we first got them straight out of like the nursery or the plant shop. So these are also things to kind of take into consideration. Sometimes hard for us to imagine because we don't look that far ahead. However, these are questions that you should be able to ask anybody that when you stop into a plant store, or you could do a little bit of your own research as well of, you know, kind of getting a sense of what they look like over time. And I'm going to highlight just a few plants here. These are the one to the far left here is a silver dollar plant. It's called Xerosisios denguii. And you could see that oftentimes people just get this as a stem. They have these really beautiful glaucous colored coin-shaped leaves. But this is actually a vining plant. And over time, it will start to vine. And if you're not like wrapping it around, you know, a bamboo stake or a little trellis, it could get like a little loppy, like a little lopsided and just kind of flop all over the place. So again, this is something to consider. You might get it as a stem, but over time it starts to grow. This one in the middle is a chain of, I think it's called Chain of Hearts. I'm much better with the scientific name than I am with the common name. It's, or string of hearts. It is Ceropegia linearis subspecies, woody eye. And this is a popular plant. You know, sometimes again, we get this as a little string. It has these little ball-like tubers that you could propagate them easily with. And again, this gets really long. So it's something that, you know, will need to be draped over. Maybe it's in a hanging basket, something of that nature. And then you have this on the right. This is one of the famous Raphidophora tetraspermas, Mini Monsteras, they're actually called, very popular. And you'll see that this plant, again, is very compact right now, but you start to see these little rootlets, these adventitious roots that are coming off of the back of it. And that actually, to me, says, oh my God, this is going to be a plant that's going to start to vine. So these are things to consider. You know, if you don't have the adequate space for them in your home, or, you know, it starts as a desk plant, it might have to move elsewhere. So those are things to consider. Here's your lipstick plant that you mentioned. And again, I mentioned it has this kind of semi-succulent leaf, has this kind of shiny leaf, so it has a little bit of a cuticle. So it should be able to protect itself from some intense sunlight. But over time, this could actually start to degrade the leaf. And you now see why it's called a lipstick plant. It's because of the flowers that emerge look like little lipstick. And this is Oxalis Triangularis. So this is, you know, another plant that actually stays quite compact. Beautiful purple foliage, has a tendency, it has a very thin leaf. So it has a tendency that if you have condensation on your windows, it'll kind of press its little leaves up against the window and will actually start to, you know, stain. It's almost like an insect wing. So you have to be very careful about those things. But these are things that you know over time. But if you want a relatively compact plant, it's, you know, that one's a great one. It's a nice shock of color. Then we move on to something like an aloe that actually has a much thicker leaf. And when I see thick leaves, I typically get the sense like, hey, this is a plant that could handle a little bit more intense light. So again, that's something that you could look at when you're looking at plants. And again, if you have thick skin, you know, when somebody says you have thick skin, it means that you can handle a lot of, like, you know, maybe verbal battery. But this plant, when it has like that kind of thick skin, thick cuticle, it could handle a lot of sun battery, if you will. And then I have these two plants. I have an asplenium, which is a bird's nest fern over to the left. And again, a plant like this stays relatively compact. It has this rosette shape, so that means it kind of grows around in like kind of a circular pattern. And then my example of a plant that doesn't usually look good over time, Dieffenbachia over to the right, which it starts to get a really caney appearance no matter what kind of light that you give it. And my dad has one growing, and his girlfriend is always like, we need to get rid of that plant because it just kind of like flops over, and they always take it out with their knee. But that's a plant that, you know, generally looks really good when you buy it, but over time it could actually look a little bedraggled. And then here's another great example of just kind of looking at structure and form. Syndapsis pictus, which is silver pothos to the left. We have Epiprenum aureum, which is golden or devil's ivy in the middle. And then we have an adenium. And if I asked you, you know, which plant would you put on and hang from your ceiling? Well, chances are you're going to want to do the ones that will start to dangle down, as opposed to the adenium, which is, you know, kind of this bulbous plant that grows up, also known as desert rose. So, you know, these are things to just kind of consider when you're purchasing plants, and oftentimes it's things that we don't consider over time. So I'm going to kind of stop here. I'm going to just do where you could find me. Plant One on Me on YouTube. So you could find me there. Again, I would encourage people to go to the playlists, because I've tried to curate things. So if you can't find, YouTube has this terrible habit of like archiving your videos that you can't find them anymore. So I'd encourage you to go to playlists. I try to curate things very well there, from pest management to general tips. And then you can find me on Instagram at Homestead Brooklyn. I do a lot of plant stuff and sometimes chicken stuff as well. And then also in the Houseplant Masterclass, which we're actually doing a discount on, it's probably the deepest I've ever discounted the Houseplant Masterclass. So we're giving $50 off after. And basically it's a month-long course, and it goes much deeper into plant care. And it's about 8 hours of audio visual, 300 or so color images and charts and stuff like that. And then we also give the 350 houseplant care spreadsheet. So you beginners probably don't need that, but as you start to fall in love with plants, you start to get a lot of plants in your life, and you have to figure out how do you manage them and how do you give them on fertilizing schedules. And actually that's what I use, is an
and Summer, just a heads up, there should just be a button right above the video where you can click to buy the course right now. So
nice.
if anyone's interested in the
Thanks.
course, there's a button right above the video where if you're interested, you can sign up right there.
Yeah, cool. Well, thank you for that. So it's Q&A time. I guess I have not as many minutes as I thought I was going to. I yapped a lot, but if there's questions, I'd love to know.
Well, the first question that I would actually have, this is a really common one that I get about the courses for folks who have content like yours, where you already give a lot of content generously, like we've just seen right now. So can you tell me, how is the material different? Like in the course, like how much deeper do you go into detail, versus what you can get for free on YouTube? Like why is it worth that price?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, one thing that I found when doing the masterclass is one of the things that was really frustrating for me on anything, like whether I'm looking for plants or whether I'm looking on some other type of subject, is that you can never find anything. You're always like looking in multiple places. And what was like really frustrating for me online personally is just going to like a source to have everything from soup to nuts laid out for you and giving you a really awesome foundational knowledge from the get-go. So I like to go back into plant history, because I think like when we start to understand plants from their origins, it really opens up a lot of doors, and we're like, oh, that's why plants are the way they are. And it helps us to kind of understand them. So I do that in the masterclass, and I kind of go much deeper into, like, for instance, on the lighting side, I do everything from actually taking lighting readings in my own home and sharing that and sharing what that means, how to actually read like Kelvin scales and what like PAR and PPFD and like mean to a plant, and like, some of the things that you could actually trip up on when it comes to light. And then I offer products actually in there as well. And then I go into like from the fertilizing side, I just don't touch upon like just fertilizing, for instance, but then I go really deep into what does a micro or macronutrient deficiency actually mean, and what are the signs that are exhibited on the leaf. So what I try to do is actually put it all in one in a way that I think is really useful and usable, and it takes you on a journey throughout the whole thing. And I try to do it in little chunks so it doesn't feel overwhelming. So I think that there's two different kinds of learners. There's people who just want to consume it all at once, and there's people who, hey, we have life, we have work, some of us have kids. It gets a little complicated with our daily life. So I tried to just break it up in chunks and distribute it on a daily basis so that you could really think about that content immediately. And there's other things too, like a lot of resources. So I go into popular botanical names, breaking down kind of some of the Latin. A lot of folks ask me like, how do you know all the Latin names and what do they mean? So I try to give all that kind of resource and information for people as all in one place. And like I said, with the spreadsheets, I can't get that deep into that kind of plant knowledge. I think people would glaze over. So at least they have that resource for them, and they can, utilize that from the master class. So to answer your question, it's just more comprehensive. It's all in one place. And I do refer to some of my YouTube videos in there in case like somebody misses them. And if I think it does a really good job, I add it as a resource to the course in order to be able to find out more information.
All right. Thanks so much, Summer. Now, I actually did have a really good question from Larissa. So Larissa says, Summer, what what plants do you personally struggle with keeping? So, she's really impressed with everything, but I think this is like a common thing when someone sees like this beautiful bounty of plants, like just in this background, we're like, okay, what is her secret? Like, is there anyone that she really has trouble with?
Yes, I've had struggles with many, and I think because the more you try, the more you find out which ones are a struggle. And I've started to travel a little bit more upstate, downstate, so I've started to figure out like, okay, which are the ones that are really high maintenance. A really great example is there's one called Hoffmannia, which is commonly known as taffeta plant, and it is a plant that requires humidity and attention all the time. And if you forget like one day, it like hates you. So that is one that I've consistently tried over and over again. I was able to make it work in my polydarium, which is kind of like this terrarium with water. And but it's a slow grower, so the plants that are fast growers completely overtook it, which is such a struggle on that. I also have this bromeliad that surprisingly has really challenged me. It's a type of Neurogelia, and it actually sends out these like rhizomes, and I haven't been able to really make it work for myself, and I'm not quite sure what it is. And that's something, again, it's process of elimination. It's trying to figure out like what it, I'm trying a much thinner fir bark kind of mixture. Maybe I was like, okay, maybe it needs to actually take in water a little bit more, and my original fir bark material was too porous. So yeah, so I think that those are challenges. What else? I have this ardisia. I really love this ardisia. They're called coral berries, and I had a really beautiful cutting, and it was growing very well. And I left for about 6 days, and obviously during the coronavirus, I wasn't bringing anybody in to take care of my plants. And that was one, unfortunately, that failed. That was a bummer. And then I had another really prized possession one that I lost probably 6 or 7 months ago. And it's actually one that I highlighted on 365 Days of Plants. And it was a very thick succulent one. And I watered it. Sometimes I'll water my plants at night if I get home really late. Not suggested, especially if it's dark. That is one that if you get any water on it, on its body whatsoever, on its stem, it will start to rot. And a little rot started on the bottom of it. It was a very old plant. So it started at the bottom of the plant, and then it just started to die. And I couldn't save it. I tried to take a cutting of it, like a fresh cutting where it wasn't diseased. So yes, you have your fair share. And I always tell people that you don't become a good gardener by not trying. You become a good gardener by trying things. So don't despair. Yeah, some plants look great, but some plants don't make it.
Yeah, it's a circle of life, to quote the Lion King, if I may.
Yeah.
So I know we've gone a little bit over time, so I just want to, if it's okay, just have a few more questions before we wrap this up, unless you have a hard stop.
Yeah. A few more questions is totally fine.
Okay, great. So I have one question which is actually pretty interesting for me, because this wasn't something that I had heard of here. I think this was Anthony. So Anthony asked this, burning question: what's your opinion on Planta or other plant tracking apps?
Yeah.
How do you feel about that? I actually hadn't heard of this.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of cool apps that have come out on the market. If some people might use iNaturalist, if you're like outside and you find a plant and you want to record it and things like that. And there's other apps that will help you track your watering and schedule, and maybe fertilizing schedule. I even developed, it's not an app, but I developed a way to take your spreadsheet that we've created in a way to just make it a little bit more interactive. So it's not technically an app, but it kind of acts a little bit more like an app. So I think it's really up to you personally. I think Plant is actually, I think, a pretty good one, but I kind of equate it to how you are as a person. Like, I downloaded Strava for like my runs, but I find like I'm a person who doesn't like to track that way. So some people might actually love it to track that way on an app. I personally love like really low, I'd say low tech, like my spreadsheet is perfect for me. But when it gets a little bit from that perspective of the app, it gets a little bit too much. So it really depends. But I think if you're somebody who needs reminders, then that's a really good way. There's also other strategies where, you start to develop a routine or ritual with your plants, and then maybe, it's 2 to 3 days a week that you say, okay, at 7 a.m. or at 5 p.m., I'm going to actually like go around and make my rounds for my plants. But I think, I don't know all the apps that are out there. I get contacted actually all the time about like a new app coming out, but sometimes it gets like to the point where you're like, oh my God, too much stuff coming at you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I hear you. I hear you there. So I'll just leave you with 2 questions before we wrap this up. So the second to last question will be from Chris, because I'm actually curious about the course. So Chris says, my biggest thing is to understand the lighting. I heard pieces about how shadows can help you understand how much light your plant is receiving. Are there any valuable pictures, that make you understand this effect in detail? And I'm kind of curious, how would your course help with this kind of curiosity?
Yeah. So, I understand that this is probably not something that everybody could actually get or afford, but I have a light meter that's called a PAR meter, and it measures photons of light, right? So I use that in the master class in order to be able to share what that sees, not what our eye sees, but like what that sees in specific windows in my house, like in the interior, in specific windows, and then breaking that down to generic terms. So what that means as what is bright indirect, what is bright light, what is direct light, and helping break that down so that I could use my home, for instance, as a way to help break it down in very layman's terms for folks. And so that one I feel like is kind of, you could get really stuck in to that section alone. I think if you're trying to blow through the sections and you don't let it really set in, then you're not going to gain the information that you need. But I think it's very helpful. It was very helpful for me getting a PAR meter and really understanding light that way, because what we see is not what a plant sees. And the typical light meters that you get in the market are usually measuring foot candles and things like that. And that you could infer some things from that, but foot candle meters could get very confused. For instance, if you have like an incandescent bulb and some fluorescent lights and sunlight coming in, it can't read all those different types of light. And so I think that what I try to do is really break down the electromagnetic spectrum, what the plant sees, what color wavelengths really interact and work with the plant, how I took metered my entire home and to show what the plants are seeing, breaking that down into examples of generic terms, and then giving examples of plants that work best in those kind of lighting conditions. So then with the 350 houseplant care spreadsheet, you'll notice I have a column in there on light that corresponds to those generic light terms. So you could get a sense of again, it's like a little cheat sheet, like a little, what are those called? The Cliff's Notes versions of plants. So you can just see, just as a little cheat sheet, like what is the typical kind of light does this plant, is this plant optimal for? So that's a little bit of how it goes into the lighting section, for instance, but you'll get some of that throughout the course. It kind of
Awesome.
builds on one another.
All right, and I guess the last question here, I really like this one. Enrique says, do you feel that there are any psychological benefits to being in a space with the quote unquote right plant that fits your lifestyle? It's so hard to find studies on this.
There is actually surprisingly more studies that have been done in hospital settings, and these are actually some of the few indoor studies that actually have come out with plants. you know, how plants make us feel a little bit more calm or collected or creative. Actually, I write a lot about it. Some people might like get my book, How to Make a Plant Love You, and say, oh, I want really tactical knowledge. I would say go to the masterclass or my YouTube channel for that, because this is a little bit more about the psychological benefits of plants. And yeah, and I think that, you know, plants could have the opposite effect too. Like if we have too much, it could stress us out, like especially if we can't get our routine or our rituals together with our plants. And I think that's a really important thing. Don't look at what other people are doing. Don't look at necessarily what I'm doing and what makes me happy. Just because I'm happy with all these plants, it doesn't mean that you getting all these plants equals you making you happy. But yeah, I think getting the right plant at the right time of your life, the right plant or plants at the right time of your life can actually have a really wonderful benefit, because I think that we have an inherent need to like nurture something. And once we actually nurture plants or animals or whatever it might be, we actually kind of figure out like that we were missing something all along. And one of the things I mentioned in the beginning is one of the things that my plants remind me of is to get outdoors. You know, I have a community garden plot, you know, that brings me so much joy. And I think that going out in nature, I went for a hike last week, you know, it was just so wonderful to be outdoors. So I think that's what like plants really remind me. And if it goes back to that North Star that I was showing of like connecting back to nature, you know, there's so much benefits that nature gives us. And you could do that as something as humble as a house plant. And in How to Make a Plant Love You, I go over not just my story, but like, I think I have 70 people's story of how plants have helped them in their own journeys and their own lives. And I just think it's so wonderful, because you begin to realize that you're not alone, and that you feel so alone with the way that you feel about like politics or anxiety, or, you know, you lost somebody important in your life, and plants play this importance. And we forgot that. And I think in many cultures, plants are still very important, and it could mirror people's a culture's cosmology. You know, even the way that they plant plants in their garden has deeper meanings, and we've kind of lost that meaning in a lot of our cultures. And I think it's just really a marvelous thing in order to be able to get that back.
All right. Thanks so much, Summer. And I really appreciate you spending some extra time with us to answer some last minute questions. And I will just ask, could everyone in the chat, could you just say thank you to Summer for taking the time to really share and share generously with us, because I've learned a lot. I've actually been growing a bunch of plants myself this summer.
It's not looking very green. It's not looking very green.
Well, okay, so I will say that this camera angle is the worst, and after the webinar, I'll pan this around and I'll show you, because I'm actually curious to get your thoughts.
Great. That's great.
But everyone in the chat is just saying thank you so much, like going crazy.
And just so you know, there's a new episode that launches tomorrow on YouTube, and then I think you have 7 days in order to be able to get that discount. So once am I right?
Yep. For the 7 days. So if you're watching this live, you can just click the button right above the video. If you're watching this on an email replay, go ahead. There should be like a button somewhere on the page or in the email you got. But yeah, it's a really great course. I know that, you know, if you've watched this all the way through, you know how great a teacher Summer is. So I'd encourage you to check it out, and it's backed by a full 30-day money back guarantee, right, Summer?
Yeah, actually, it's backed up by the first 72 hours. If you do not like the course, then in the first 72 hours, because it'll give you a sense of what it's like, then send us an email at support@summerrayne.net, and then let us know. And like I said, the course is over 26 days. So then in the first 72 hours, if you don't like it, then that's fine. We'll give you your full money
That
back.
was why I was thinking of the length of the course. Yep.
Yeah.
In any case, money back guarantee. But thank you so much to everyone for joining us as well. So your help has been really appreciated, and I appreciate everyone's enthusiasm in the chat.
And see you guys tomorrow on YouTube.
All right. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.
All right.